want you to hit me as hard as you can.
Bruce Lee is one of the most iconic figures in pop culture history, instantly recognizable through sight and sound. He remains, nearly 5 decades since his death, one of the most influential and recognizable athlete actors to ever grace the martial arts studio and the silver screen. Through a legacy solidified by talent, artistry, personality, and controversy, we remember Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee was born Lee Jun-fan in San Francisco in 1940, the year of the dragon. This distinction is an honorable one in Chinese culture, as it marks a symbol of luck, strength, and success. Soon after his birth, his family relocated to Hong Kong, where his Chinese-born father could continue his career in opera. Lee began appearing in movies early on, with his first lead being alongside his famous father, Lee Hoi-chun, in 1950's The Kid, although he was cast in motion pictures as early as 1941 when he was just a baby. Lee attended Hong Kong's all-boys LaSalle College before being transferred to another Catholic school, St. Francis Xavier's College. He was introduced to martial arts by his father and trained in the field as a means of self-defense. Hey, child actors have it rough. He was additionally fascinated by boxing and even dancing, winning a competition in the Cuban style of cha-cha, which he obviously committed himself to. His respect for martial arts led him to the Wing Chun form, studying under the renowned and legendary Ip Man. But Lee wasn't immediately accepted. Facing racism and oppression for what was not the first, he moved to Hong Kong during the Japanese occupation, and certainly not the last time. Wing Chun, its master urged, was strictly meant for Chinese natives. That Lee was born in the US and his mother had German heritage slowed down his acceptance from Ip Man. Despite an upper-class household, Lee was entangled with rough neighborhoods and engaged in numerous fights, with some run-ins with the law capping off his trouble. To avoid jail time, Lee was sent back to the States in 1959. Here, he began teaching martial arts, developing his own brand called Junfeng Gung Fu, eventually opening his own facility in Seattle. He also began studying at the University of Washington, where he majored in drama and took philosophy classes. It was here he met Linda, who he married in 1964 and had 2 children with, Brandon in 1965 and Shannon in 1969. In 1964, Bruce Lee had one of the most defining and detail-muddled fights in martial arts history. His opponent was the master, Wong Jack-man. Wong Jack-man's side of history tells that Lee was speaking ill of predecessors and thus was openly challenged. The Bruce Lee perspective, whether true or not, speaks more in tune with Lee's character. Lee wanted to continue teaching non-Chinese people the sacred martial arts, a controversial decision similar to his tutelage under Ip Man. The condition was that if Lee defeated his newfound nemesis, he could continue. There are discrepancies on the outcome, but Lee's own end result was that he continued teaching anyone who wished to learn, no matter their heritage. As noted retrospectively, Lee insisted that, quote, distinctions of race and nation must be discarded. This event also marked a turning point in Lee's professional career. Displeased he could not defeat his enemy with brevity, Lee founded Jeet Kune Do, adapted from his own Junfeng Gung Fu, which pushed that students cut to the core, with special attention given to practicality, flexibility, speed, and efficiency. Lee also partook in various martial arts tournaments and championships, perfecting the famed one-inch punch. One of the most important of his life would be the Long Beach International Karate Championships. This event caught the attention of TV producer William Dozier, best known at the time for creating the Batman series with Adam West and Burt Ward. Dozier wanted Lee to play the son of famed Chinese-American detective Charlie Chan on a series. The show was never produced, but he found a better role, that of sidekick Kato to Van Williams' Green Hornet on the Green Hornet. Lee's phenomenal physical moves were both useful and problematic for the production. Lee was an absolute master, but producers insisted he slow down his moves because they were simply too fast for the camera to catch. Although the Green Hornet only lasted one season, ending in 1967, that was enough to put him in the spotlight of Western audiences. He had become the first notable Asian American star. The exposure further reignited his passion for film, collaborating on an ill-fated project with students James Coburn, one of the Magnificent Seven, and Sterling Silliphant, who had won an Oscar for writing In the Heat of the Night. His most important movie role to that point, however, wasn't on screen, but as a karate advisor on The Wrecking Crew, which also gave friend Chuck Norris, who Lee met years prior at a martial arts tournament, his debut. The movie, however, is more infamous for being Sharon Tate's final film before her murder. Tate was actually one of Lee's many famous students, as was her then husband Roman Polanski, hairstylist Jay Sebring, murdered the same night as Tate, Hollywood legend Steve McQueen, Marlowe co-star James Garner, and basketball great Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who Lee developed a strong friendship with and would later share the screen with on Game of Death. Lee committed additional fight choreography and made various small appearances in both film and television throughout the late 60s and early 70s. Around this time, he allegedly developed the concept for what would become Kung Fu, starring David Carradine, although this has been debunked. Lee may not have had a hand in its creation, but he was still interested in the lead role of Kwai Chang Caine. While Warner Brothers execs weren't sure Lee was fit for the role, a more telling reason for Lee getting passed over was that Warner Brothers TV head Tom Kuhn couldn't understand Lee's accent. In a revealing, shameful case of Hollywood whitewashing, no more actors of Chinese descent were considered, and thus Carradine landed his breakthrough. Partly dejected at what he perceived to be a lack of success in America, Lee returned to Hong Kong, where he was pleased to discover that the Green Hornet had a bit of a cult following. It was here that Lee signed a contract with Golden Harvest, a newly formed studio that specialized in action films. It had been a long journey for Bruce Lee to land a major studio contract, and really, his trajectory represents an ironic departure from one of his Jeet Kune Do philosophies that, quote, one does not take the winding detours, it follows a straight line to the objective. 1971's The Big Boss gave Bruce Lee his first starring role and put him alongside Shaw Brothers' favorite James Tien. The actioner finds Lee taking on the head of a drug trafficking ring and let him show off many of the skills that were too fast for American television. His next picture, 1972's Fist of Fury, also known as The Chinese Connection, allowed Lee to further express his skills, but also gave him a story that was more personal, with his character standing up to forced Japanese influence and blatant racism, two things he experienced directly due to his Chinese ancestry. That same year saw the release of Way of the Dragon, which was made under Lee's own Concord Productions Inc., co-founded with friend and producer Raymond Chow. Lee didn't only act, but served as director, writer, and fight choreographer. He even gave friend Chuck Norris a small role. In 1972, production began on Game of Death, which Lee would also write and direct. During filming, Warner Brothers, who Lee had recently scuffled with over Kung Fu, called about Enter the Dragon, a joint production between Warner Brothers, Concord, and Golden Harvest. Enter the Dragon would be a monumental opportunity for Lee and Asian American entertainers, serving as Hollywood's first major martial arts film. It was also the last film Bruce Lee would complete. In May 1973, Lee collapsed during post-production of Enter the Dragon. He was diagnosed with cerebral edema, or excess fluid in and around the brain. In July, just 1 month before the film was to premiere, Lee traveled to Hong Kong to continue working on various projects, staying with actress Betty Ting Pei, a reported mistress. He again had a bout of headaches, something triggered prior to his diagnosis. On July 20th, Lee went for a nap and never woke up. Bruce Lee was 32. The untimely demise was not without controversy, with everything from an allergic reaction to a painkiller to a family curse to a murder plot, with producer Raymond Chow and or the Triad being involved, circling the death. One recent plausible consideration is the added stress of heat stroke, brought on by the fact that Lee removed his sweat glands, as the look of sweat was unappealing to his image. The official cause of death was death by misadventure. Pallbearers included Stephen McQueen, James Coburn, and his brother. Bruce Lee was buried in Seattle, as his son Brandon would be just 2 decades later. But the film industry wasn't yet done with Bruce Lee. Years after his death, Robert Klaus, who directed Enter the Dragon, stepped in to complete the unfinished Game of Death. The regenerated production started with the footage shot with Lee as Billy Lowe before departing the project. Around 11 minutes was used in the final film, with doubles, lookalikes, stock footage, and even a cardboard cutout filling in the gaps. Klaus even utilized actual footage from Lee's funeral in what may be the most meta example of Brucesploitation in the subgenre's history. It wasn't long after Lee's death that Brucesploitation, a curious breed of movies that's like ordering a Bruce Lee classic from Wish, exploded, emerging from Asian movie studios trying to capitalize on the shortened fame, with titles that played off his most famous films, like Exit the Dragon, Enter the Tiger, and New Fist of Fury. There was even one called Bruce Lee Fights Back from the Grave. The Silent Flute, which was the script Lee had worked on with Silifant and Coburn, was adapted into 1978's Circle of Iron with David Carradine, the same year Game of Death premiered. Bruce Lee's legacy has only been cemented further in the decades that followed his death. Partly inspired by Game of Death was the groundbreaking beat-em-up video game Kung Fu Master, itself with a direct line to arcade favorites like Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat, although there's no evidence Lee ever ripped someone's head and spine from their body. He has even been directly featured in numerous video games as a playable character. He, too, has had statues erected in his honor, parks dedicated to him, and honored on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. His widow Linda's 1975 book was later adapted into 1993's Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, which at one point had considered son Brandon to star. It would end up being dedicated to him following his accidental death. Bruce Lee's powerful presence also permitted a wide acceptance of martial arts in the Western world, with notable contributions to cinema. Without him, there may not be the careers of Chuck Norris, Jackie Chan, who appeared in his share of Brucesploitation flicks, or, like it or not, Steven Seagal.
That's for Bobby.
For much of his life, Bruce Lee exemplified his famous be water philosophy. It goes, in part, quote, "Be water, my friend. Empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless,
Like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend.
It calls to mind his statement on Jeet Kune Do, quote, "It utilizes all ways and is bound by none, and, likewise, uses any techniques or means which serve its end." He was his own individual, standing up for the rights of the oppressed and promoting a field in a way that hadn't been considered internationally. Bruce Lee was one of the eminent icons of film and martial arts. Like water, yes, but also a solid constant of inspiration and admiration throughout his time and well into the 21st century.